From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the program for you. Rapid action needed. Top scientists urge government cooperation to avert environmental disaster. Arctic opportunity. Why world powers are fighting for domination at the top of the world. Facebook war room. The social media giant targets misinformation less than 3 weeks before EU elections. Ticket to Europe. North Macedonia elects a pro-Western president, paving the way to NATO and the EU. And Brussels bowling. Tram drivers in Europe's capital fight for bragging rights in tonight's Raw Moment. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. It is time to meet our panelists. We have joining us Andrew Byrne. He's EU correspondent for the Sunday Times. Hi, Andrew. What story are you watching?
Well, I'm watching North Macedonia very closely. It's a country I know well, and they missed the opportunity. They weren't given the opportunity to start their EU membership talks last year, so they have a moment of truth coming up now, and we'll see if they get it.
All right, we will indeed. Okay, also joining us tonight, Jennifer Baker, an EU policy journalist here in Brussels. Jennifer, what are you watching?
The Facebook story. It's, you know, the perennial thing. It's almost too little too late. 3 weeks to the elections. Now we're hearing about a war room. I'm sorry, it more needed to be done a lot sooner, so I'm keeping an eye on what is being done and whether or not it's just window dressing or anything concrete made.
Actually, something can change. Okay. Also joining us here in the studio, Christina Berzina. She's an international security expert at the German Marshall Fund. Thanks, Christine, for being with us. What story are you keeping an eye on?
I am looking at the Arctic today. Secretary Pompeo is in Europe to look far north, and we're moving the conversation now on the Arctic from belugas to potentially submarines and something harder.
What a leap that is. All right, we will be getting to that in just a moment. But first, our top story, the most dangerous and unprecedented decline of nature in human history. But that is the conclusion of a landmark new report from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. All right, it is the most thorough report ever done on the state of our planet, compiled over 3 years by 145 experts over 50 countries. Now, its chair called it an ominous picture, saying that we are eroding the very foundations of our economies, our livelihoods, our health, and our quality of life.
There is no doubt that this is certainly the most comprehensive report ever written, with an incredible amount of detail. But at the same time, we should recognise that the basic message is the same as what the scientific community has been saying for more than 30 years. Biodiversity is important in its own right. Biodiversity is important for human well-being, and we humans are destroying it. If we want to leave a world for our children and grandchildren that has not been destroyed by human activities, we need to act now.
So that was Robert Watson, the chair of that report. Well, let us take a closer look at what he was talking about in that study there. According to figures, 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, 25%, many within decades, and more than ever before in human history. There is a 47% decline of natural ecosystems, and much of it is caused by the 300 to 400 million tons of waste dumped into our waters. Now, the area of dead zones, so-called dead zones in our oceans, is the size of the UK. 75% of the terrestrial environment has been severely altered by human actions. I mean, if we look at this study, it is, you know, every study that comes out, it seems like the worst that has been done, like the worst findings ever. But is this going to fall on deaf ears? Are we getting sort of a climate change info fatigue?
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's a sort of a numbness by the general public who are told these warnings time and again. And I think perhaps the challenge for politicians and for campaigners is to try and express to people how it affects their own lives and their own interests if this biodiversity decline continues. I mean, if you think about, you know, the shift towards rezoning coastal communities for development leads to flood risks, leads to costly flood prevention requirements. And so I think the challenge really is to show people why it's not just about the landscape and the diversity, but it's about our own lives and the viability of human life.
Yeah, and I mean, what's really interesting here is that, yes, the figures are there to show it, and politicians are actually jumping on the bandwagon. Is it just because conveniently election time is here, and therefore we are talking about it?
Well, obviously, election time means that politicians will say what they think the electorate wants to hear, but what we need to see is actual concrete action from those who, after they do get elected, to keep those promises. I mean, it's very difficult for people who are not scientists and not experts to hear these reports, and as you say, they are always quite alarmist, but maybe that's because things are actually getting worse year on year. You know, I mean, but when you think about biodiversity, you know, it's not the animals you'll see around you or that you see every day. It's things like insect populations that are actually we require for pollination and for our own food and our own sustainability. So, I mean, even if you don't care about the animals, be selfish. This is about humans, you know. You start at the bottom, start wiping out other species. You know, eventually we're going to get to the top of the food chain, and that's where we are. I mean, when I was a kid, you'd go on a long car journey, you'd drive, by the time you get there, the windscreen would be covered in insects. That doesn't actually happen anymore. And people don't see it because it takes, you know, 20 years to see in your daily life the difference. But, you know, the house is on fire. We need to act now.
I mean, is this the first time really in, you know, they've been talking about this for the last 3 decades, but is this the first time really that this is sort of mainstream now, that we're discussing it as if it will really impact our lives, but in a way that there's more urgency? Is it mainstream now?
I think for certain people there is. I think if you keep it local, then there is. If you talk about the effect on your local mushrooms in the forest where you go out across Europe, this, for example, is a very important pastime, then it matters. That it is actually a crisis when in the fall and the spring you don't do your regular routines. I think the ability to transition the narrative from a gigantic policy paper and a scientist on television to what is going on in your forest, what's going on in your lake. Will you be able to fish? Will you be able to pick your mushrooms? Will you be able to make that jam? If that doesn't happen, it is a crisis. It is a crisis of your tradition. It's a crisis of your culture.
I think you mentioned the key word there is a narrative.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to add, I mean, I think for Europe, one of the big challenges and one of the sources of hypocrisy is the reliance we have on our agricultural sector. And a huge portion of the EU budget is spent on subsidies to agriculture with very little reference to how farmers can be supported to protect biodiversity and protect the environment. And so I think, you know, in terms of what Europe's going to do with this, the real challenge for Europe is to look at how the environment and farming work together and ensure that those negative impacts are reduced. Exactly.
Well, let's talk to someone who actually knows a lot about bridging the science and the policy here. For more analysis, joining us from Basel is Friedrich Wolf. He's an international biodiversity campaigner for Friends of the Earth. Friedrich, thanks for joining us. And, you know, in your work, you basically take the science and you translate it into understandable and accessible information for policymakers. And this is really the crucial role there. Isn't this the missing link here? How do you think politicians this time are going to react to what's just been put out?
Yeah, well, it's really crucial that this report, which is indeed, as you've said, one of the greatest and most fundamental and broad reports that's ever been done, gets taken up by policies. And we need to get these messages across. And I think it's quite clear it's essential to have biodiversity protection. It's essential to do the things the report has stated. And I think you mentioned European elections. That could be a first step, you know, taking up the messages, elect those people who really care, because it's not some nice thing. It's really essential and fundamental to our lives.
In the work that you do, how do you take the science and give it to politicians in a way that they will see the urgency and actually do something about it? Tell us about, you know, that process and the work that you do.
Yes, well, we've engaged in the process. We've talked to the politicians before the meetings and during the meetings. And what we will then do now is, of course, advocate, go to politicians nationally in the EU member states, in other countries, and ensure that it's been taken up. And we're also, of course, doing press work to get it across.
Are they the weakest link? Are politicians the weakest link? Is it fair to put the burden on them? It's the reason why we're still talking about this?
Indeed. That's really, really important, because all the solutions have been there. The report says stuff we've been saying for decades. So it really confirms what we've been saying. And the obstacle is indeed that the policy is not right. The whole political and economical system needs to be changed. The report talks about transformational change. And it's really important that it happens.
Okay, Friedrich, finally, you know, in the past we've seen outrage and then it fizzles. But are we at a tipping point now? Do you think it's going to be different this time around?
I do hope, because this report has had buy-in from politicians. It's mandated by politicians. The final report has been approved by politicians, and it's as you say, the most important report that's ever been done on the issue. And I'm more optimistic than ever. We need to get. We will get this across, indeed.
All right, thank you for that. Friedrich Wolf there, a campaigner for Friends of the Earth, for joining us. It's interesting the word he used, that this report is approved by politicians. It's almost like the information is not enough to convince them that it needs to have their approval, or buy-in is the word I think that he used.
Well, I think your question about whether we should put the burden on politicians was a very good one, because I think we do need to, and it also feeds in a little bit to what Andrew was saying about sort of mass farming and responsibility. There is, I think, this practice of putting guilt onto consumers, where we think that, oh, if I just consume a little bit less and I don't buy that plastic item, or I just don't do this. I mean, sure, we can all do our own little bit, and often our own consumer power is all we have, but this is a systemic problem. And, you know, as individuals, we really don't have an awful lot of power in affecting change from systems of industry that go way beyond the borders of Europe. We actually need our other power as individuals is to put pressure on the politicians that we vote for. So I think they really are the key point there, where consumers actually have more value than in saying, you know, we'll buy the more expensive item because it includes less plastic. Not everyone has that option. So I do think this consumer guilt needs to change into action on politicians.
Now that it seems like, we don't know, it seems like it is a voting point for people who vote in the elections, do you think that finally the narrative is going to change?
I am skeptical about the ability of a very technical long report to change the narrative by itself. I think it does take policymakers and it takes campaigners to translate something that is a technical document.
What about voters voting on the issue?
Voters themselves, I think, have to understand it and move on it, right? I think it takes individuals who are compassionate about an issue to really change these things. Climate change, I think, has a lot of that grassroots support. I think biodiversity can have it as well, because it is about things that we care about in our environments and in our communities. And but it is taking that appeal to the individual person and putting the pressure on a policymaker to put in a policy at whether it's the local level or the European level,
or even
was saying,
you know, when you talk about farming, that's something that actually hits people, Europeans, a lot more than you know, a big biodiversity report.
And that's going to be one of the big choices. Like when it comes down to it, we're facing huge industrial interests in this battle, and so that's been one of the tough dilemmas that the politicians face.
Exactly. On that note, industrial and commercial interests versus the environment. I mean, today's report really says one of the worst affected areas in this is the Arctic, and we have that same conversation happening there. This week, its future is in focus at an international summit. Representatives from the 8 Arctic states will be meeting in Finland. Well, you have the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He arrived there a day ahead of the meeting. He was sounding the alarm, not on global warming, no, but on security. With the melting ice making the region more accessible, the U.S. is expected to use the summit to take aim at rival powers Russia and China. And faced with the aggressive ambitions of competitors, Pompeo says that an increased U.S. presence is essential. Now, Russia, the U.S., China, and NATO have all increased their military presence in the region as they fight for Arctic resources and opportunities. I mean, isn't this, it's kind of cynical. It's the fact that climate change is actually bringing about a lot more opportunities that make it so tempting for states. This was the story that you were closely watching. I'll put this to you.
Yes. I mean, we've really been accustomed over the past few decades to think of the Arctic as a place for the discussion, for climate change, for environmentalism, for more sustainable drilling practices. We've seen the narrative really change on that from the environmental side to a hard security side. That has a lot to do with Russia's much more aggressive presence in the Arctic, having more bases, more exercises, which has been also the response of the United States and of NATO to be also more present in the region militarily. And so we've seen really a transition of perspectives on the Arctic from one that has much more to do with the environment to something that is much more about hard power and how they play out. And that is exactly the narrative that Pompeo is going to have in Finland and what this trip is about, going not only to Finland but also later to Greenland to look at some of these strategic interests.
Exactly. That's exactly the word he used. He used the words strategic engagement. He was talking about new threats, meaning their competition, and looking at natural resources. And he was saying fair competition is going to be a free-for-all, and the environment will probably take a back seat. Again.
Yeah, I mean, you could say on the one hand, you could say, surely this is the forum for these great powers to be thinking how they protect the Arctic and biodiversity. But let's be real, that's not going to happen. And in any case, the way to protect the Arctic and biodiversity is not going to be about actions in the Arctic. It's about actions in major economies around the world, in China and the US and so on. I mean, one, I think, sort of unexpected or unobvious advantage of this summit is that it actually is one of the few forums that brings together Russia and the US and the other powers.
In the same time,
and something tells me they might be discussing a few other issues while Pompeo and Lavrov are in the room. So at least there's a conversation happening. I think that's to be welcomed.
I mean, is there an argument to be made, though? I'm sure they will be presenting it, is that the economic argument, yes, the climate is an issue, it is urgent, and well, so is prosperity, and so is lifting the world out of...
Well, is it, though? I mean, honestly, we talk about GDP as the greatest value that we place on how our society is doing, how our bloc is doing. Maybe we actually not just start to think about a better measurement of what makes a society or a country or a bloc like the EU successful. Is it happiness? Is it health? Is it, you know, is it always got to come down to money? I mean, it's absolutely preposterous. The ice caps are melting and there are commercial interests out there who are just excited about the prospect of new shipping lanes.
And actually,
to do what? Bring more goods to more people so that rich people can spend more money on things they don't need.
But you know what? Now that China's actually shown interest, China's had observer status since 2013, and now they really want a piece of the Arctic. Everybody is seeing this as the go signal to pursue even more, you know, the economic model there.
There are economic prospects to be had in the far north. That is true. You know, everything from the natural resources and drilling, which, for example, in the United States case, drilling was not something that was pursued in the Arctic under the Obama administration. The Trump administration has reversed course on that. There's a tremendous amount of interest in the northern shipping routes, as opposed to going through the Suez Canal. This is why China also is so interested in this. But really, we're not talking about these paradigm shifts economically. We are not going to have all of the shipping go through the north, and we're not going to suddenly have, you know, many, many times more oil and, you know, go back to an inefficient economy just because there are resources in the Arctic. So I would say spending too much attention on the economic aspect of it is not... It's not really where it is. I feel in some ways that's almost a Trojan horse to the more strategic interests.
Which is security.
Which I think is security. Which is this flexing of the arm muscles everywhere.
Which brings me to the next question, because economically, one estimate says 17.8 trillion. It's up there, and it's bigger than the U.S. economy. But is it going? Where is it going? Is it going to be a geopolitical struggle more than the economic side?
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think there were great expectations that this would be, an economically transformative development, but especially with the low oil price. I think it makes the viability of oil exploration there it makes it less viable. So it's a security question, and I also think, and I think I've said this point already, I think it's an opportunity for powers to discuss other things that are happening around the world. So,
can we see a Russia and U.S. cooperation, or even more tension? Is that...
Well, I mean, look, if you think back to the forums where Russia and the US have had to exchange with each other, we had this notorious Trump-Putin summit in Helsinki, which attracted a lot of negative comment. And clearly there are actors in the Trump administration who want to have greater dialogue with Russia. I'm sure many Europeans would agree that that's a good thing. Some would disagree. So this forum, I think it creates a wider forum for them to discuss other issues outside the Arctic.
For one thing, we're already going to see a lot of icebreakers and maybe more submarines, as I was reading. So that's going to change up north. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics, Facebook sets up a war room to tackle fake news ahead of the EU elections, but will it really make a difference? Plus, a new poll suggests that Marine Le Pen's party is taking the lead in France. What could it mean for a far-right alliance in Europe? Don't go away. Welcome back to Our Politics. Now, Facebook have opened the doors to journalists ahead of the EU elections, unveiling their command center for tackling misinformation during the EU elections. But is it enough? Well, let's get more from Alex and our team in theCUBE. Maybe he has an answer. Alex?
Thanks, Tessa. I'll try my best. Welcome to theCUBE, of course. This is our social media centre right here at the heart of Europe. And look, fighting misinformation is nothing new to this European election cycle. Let's cast our minds back to last year. And you remember, of course, the debunk we did on the adverts paid for by the Hungarian government targeting the presidents of the Liberals and Democrats in Europe. That's the European Parliament grouping, Guy Verhofstadt. Now, we pointed out in a series of posts why these videos were effectively misquoting and misleading individual users. That prompted Guy Verhofstadt himself to write to Mark Zuckerberg demanding Facebook take action. That was a CUBE debunk, brought it to the attention of Facebook, and since then we've been trying to find the adverts. Today they're far harder to find, so there's some sense of action taken there. But look, Facebook has been facing demands to tackle misinformation for a long time. More recently, look at this report from the Spanish elections from the not-for-profit organisation AVAS. They're saying they identified 3 networks which are effectively breaking Facebook's rules to push out a far-right message. They say Facebook took action on that. So this idea of Facebook being under pressure to clean up its platform and protect its platform from politically motivated fake news and disinformation isn't new. But what is new is this. They've let journalists into this. It's effectively a situation room, a control room in Facebook Dublin. It's based on what the organisation, the social network, did ahead of the US midterm elections. They began operations at the end of April, and they're going to keep going throughout May. So what exactly are we looking at here? It looks like a lot of people looking at screens. By the way, one of those screens in there, they have Euronews playing all the time. So if they're watching us, then it's hopefully a good thing. Here we have a little bit of a breakdown about exactly what we're talking about. Around 40 people working in this situation room with 24 languages represented, aiming to cover the whole of Europe. And just at the bottom there, engineers are assessing the content to see if it's breaking Facebook's terms and conditions. They can then delete it, demote it, or just leave it as it is if it doesn't break the rules. So Facebook very keen here to show this as them tackling the problem. We contacted Facebook. It's worth saying they didn't get back to us by the time of going to air. It is a bank holiday in Dublin and might be playing some part in it there. But we'll, of course, bring you more information through this election cycle. But is it enough? Is 40 people in this room in Dublin enough, really, to cover an election which, let's face it, is right the way across the continent? Well, I asked Matt Navarra. He's a regular voice here we've talked to in theCUBE, social media consultant. I asked him, what more do we need to know about whether or not this effort from Facebook is going to work? This is what he told me.
A bit more about the number of times that they haven't captured it and what that has led to in more detail. And they do provide some of that information, but it seems quite a long time after the fact, and it's more of a case study of a couple of sound bites of information. So I would wonder if it'd be better if there was a bit more transparency around their failings in this area as much as some of their successes.
So Matt wants to know, he thinks we all should know, the content that Facebook failed to catch, that people like us and others have to point out to them. They want Facebook to be more transparent. So it's fair to say, Tessa, with the EU elections now just under 3 weeks away, Facebook going to be under a lot of pressure to deliver results and tackle fake news with this situation room.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. And now joining us in the studio is Belgian MEP Gerolf Annemans from the Vlaams Belang Group here in the Europe of Nations and Freedom Group. And still with us, EU policy journalist and tech expert Jennifer Baker and Andrew Byrne from the Sunday Times. I'll start with you, Jennifer, on this one, because you being our tech expert here, it's almost like a reaction to, the past discussions we've had here at Raw Politics. It's the problem with algorithms deciding what is fake and what is not. So here, let's hire 40 people and maybe they can, put a face and actually make sure fake news is fake news. And is this enough, though? I mean, what is it? It seems like a reaction.
For 28 member states, that's not even 2 people per state when you break it down like that. And, we often talk about, when you're combating this sort of disinformation, fake news is very nebulous. It's very difficult to pin down. Hate speech or incitement to violence and these other sort of tangential issues are much easier to identify, and we have horizontal EU rules for them. But there are different rules regarding electioneering and campaigning in every different EU member state. So we often fall back, and our solution is often media literacy and critical thinking. And yeah, we can even go as far as saying we teach people to do that. You can teach a kid in a classroom how to assess a piece of information critically. But can you do that every minute of every hour, 19 hours a day that you're on your smartphone? You absolutely can't. That is why we even hear of Facebook contractors in the US suffering from burnout, because the difference between this and the old forms of propaganda and sort of disinformation that we saw that people say
harder to identify.
That has always existed. What has changed are what I call the 3 V's: the vector, the volume, and the velocity. The vector is it's social media. It's coming from your friends. The sources are slightly different. The volume is vast. It's not just getting a leaflet through your door or seeing a billboard. And the velocity is it's coming all the time, and it's really insurmountable.
Listening to that, Gerolf, you are campaigning right now, and this obviously affects the EU elections. How does this make you feel? That what Jennifer had said and what Facebook is doing, does it make you feel better, in fact, that they're doing something about it, sort of?
No, actually not. So I worry personally, if I hear this, that we are stepping towards something like a Big Brother system where people unknown and without any argument can decide upon the content of the information. And so the freedom of speech is always in conflict with that. And I always make a difference between the Facebook accounts the fake accounts and the fake news. And when you go to fake news, there's someone who has to decide it is fake news or not. And we have the classic media.
But do you think
who are
fake news
very
should be regulated?
I'm sorry?
Do you think fake news should be identified and taken out of
Not
social
necessarily.
media? No.
Depends. That's what I'm saying. Manipulation through fake accounts, no doubt it should be dealt with. But fake news is a much more delicate issue. And so if Mr. Verhofstadt is the one behind all this, he's the worst guy you can have, because I knew him as Prime Minister, and he had a bad reputation about manipulating journalists.
Oh, then we better put that question to him.
And he has a pretty bad reputation as well.
He's not here to defend himself, but we probably should be asking him. Right?
He will not come.
Can I take the other side for a moment, which is to say that Facebook faces these two contradictory demands, in fact, from people. They say on the one hand, there's all of this content on your platform, and you should remove it, you should police it. 40 people aren't enough, you should hire 400 or 4,000 people, and you should be on top of every post at every second of every day. And then on the other hand, they have this challenge, which is, no, you can't regulate what we do. That's Big Brother. Big Brother is controlling what we can say. This should be a free platform. So I think this group, the Situation Room in Facebook, its headquarters, it's a good step in the right direction. I think it should be welcomed. And I think, in a sense, I'm always conscious of the fact that for a lot of politicians who might see their traditional parties suffering, Facebook is a convenient target for them to point out and say, maybe the reason for our success is because of all these dark forces on the internet, and maybe they should look closer to home.
Okay, we don't have much time, but very quickly.
No doubt about violence. I'm not disputing that.
Those are like two separate issues. But as I want to say is, I mean, you've heard me say 100 times, I don't believe we should be giving the policing of our social content to private companies who have a vested interest in making money out of it. But let's just separate the couple of different things. Facebook is the owner of Instagram and Facebook, the platform. It's also the owner of WhatsApp and the Messenger. Those are two separate things. One is effectively a publisher, the other is a private communication service, and we regulate those differently at EU level. You can still protect the right to freedom of speech and private communications whilst doing something about the worst excesses of bad publishers.
Before we go, just very, very quickly, do you think that politicians now just use fake news as a way to disregard news and media that they don't agree with?
I don't think so. I think politicians...
You don't find anyone is guilty of that?
That systematically use fake news are not followed. They will not be gaining from it in the long term or even in the mid term.
I mean, even people in the far right have been, accused of saying, oh, that's fake news, but just because you don't like what someone else is saying. You think politicians are using this strategy?
No, if you're a politician who gets elected off the back of fake news and social media, you're not going to be very incentivized to do much about it in your next term, are you?
Okay, there we go. A lot of, very, very divisive issue, definitely. And this election campaign, it's not just taking place online. Politicians from all parties have been out and about, as Gerolf has been. And let's get the latest election news now with the Ballot Buzz. Stepping out of France and into Belgium. Rassemblement National leader Marine Le Pen traveled to Brussels this weekend to call on Belgians to vote for the Flemish far-right party Vlaams Belang.
Si l'on ne change pas radicalement l'organisation européenne telle qu'elle existe aujourd'hui, alors très certainement l'Europe n'en aura plus que le nom.
And while there, she courted her Hungarian ally in a bid to build an alliance in Brussels.
Et si M. Orban vient, tant mieux. Mais même s'il ne vient pas, le supergroupe, il existera, avec ou sans lui.
But just how much love are the French showing for Miss Le Pen? Well, one Ipsos poll published this weekend put her Rassemblement National party ahead of Emmanuel Macron's En Marche for the first time this year. Meanwhile, good news for ousted Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont. Spain's Supreme Court has ruled that he can contest the EU election. Puigdemont was previously banned from taking part after fleeing Spain to avoid charges over the failed Catalan independence vote in 2017. And while the UK continues to tie itself in knots over Brexit, in Finland, the Social Democratic Party is launching the European Election Manifesto with the message, "We don't Brexit, we fix it." Talk about throwing shade at the UK. The Finnish party is vowing to fix what is broken rather than walking away. That's something that can go viral. We don't Brexit, we fix it. do you think of that?
I think it's quite a nice turn of phrase.
It is a nice little slogan. You're right with that. Okay, let's go back to the fact that Marine Le Pen was here for and was with Vlaams Belang, promoting Vlaams Belang. Why do you need Marine Le Pen? Why does Vlaams Belang need Marine Le Pen to come here to Belgium, speak French in Flanders?
Belgium is a very complicated country.
Yeah.
You have the Dutch part, and it's separated from the French part. And then there is Brussels, where both bilingual come together.
Sure.
And so, especially in Brussels, it's very important.
But why do you need her? Why do you need her
Well,
here?
many French-speaking people in Belgium know Marine Le Pen very well and want to vote for her.
Was that
and
the
so
target,
her
then?
advice could be very useful to Vlaams Belang.
So was that the target, to get the French-speaking?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Because we are open. We are the first party who did this, the Flemish party, to have bilingual campaigns 20 years ago. And Marine Le Pen comes with her image and her support in my advantage.
So you are banking on her image, that image, okay?
Yeah.
Hoping to get support in that, But here we are again, the same unite the right. But and Marine Le Pen had in that press conference had called on Hungary and Poland. Poland and the position on Russia is one divisive issue. So how is this unite the right ever going to move forward, or are we just going to have to regurgitate and repeat this?
Well, it seems to me the elephant in the room during this press conference was the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. And the fact is that the real story here, I think, is that uniting the right is actually quite difficult because there's many different parties. They're not necessarily used to international cooperation with each other. And it seems that there are two distinct groups, two competitive groups forming, in fact. You have Marine Le Pen, Vlaams Belang, and maybe others. And then you have Orbán, who this week is meeting with Salvini of Italy and also with Strache, Heinz-Christian Strache of Austria. And so I wonder if Marine Le Pen's party is really where the action is going to be on the far right. I wonder if maybe we should look elsewhere.
I'll have to correct you. We all signed the Salvini agreement to go in the same group. Marine Le Pen, Vlaams Belang, Salvini, Strache, every one of us will be together. Orbán will not.
No.
He will stay in his...
So you deny that there's competition?
I think he likes to be in the EPP, and he has some reasons for it, and he can stay there, but we have to cooperate.
He's sort of half in, half out. He's a bit Schrödinger's EPP at the moment. I would say, she called it a supergroup. Any music fans out there will probably know supergroups are often very much less than the sum of their parts.
Okay, so you are optimistic.
Optimistic from a non-right-wing point of view.
Sure. From an outsider's point of view.
I think many of these parties, each of them have elements that other people in the group find difficult. You could say that's the case with any political family, I suppose, but I think there's a legacy of anti-Semitic issues with the Front National. In Poland and Hungary, there's an issue around the attitudes towards Russia and whether they can overcome these problems, I think, is a real test.
you don't agree
with... Marine Le Pen cleaned all these so-called issues of the past. She has founded another party, not only with another name, but with an entirely other party.
So she's wiped the slate clean of everything that went before.
Yes, I think her success and her getting 40% of the electoral vote during the presidential elections in France is the result of the fact that there's no issue to compare her party with any other
with her party as it was before.
And now, but when we see it pulling ahead of Emmanuel Macron's party, doesn't that say something?
Well, yeah, there's a huge amount of fragmentation. If you looked, I wouldn't underestimate Marine Le Pen at all. But if you look at that poll list of parties, what you're seeing in France is what you're seeing in many European countries, which is huge fragmentation. So it's the biggest party in this poll, but it's still only 22%. I think it's a huge problem for the political mainstream.
And I wonder how much of this clumping together.
Important moment, that Le Pen, bigger party than Macron's. Please don't.
I think the message is that don't underestimate. All right.
Please don't wipe that with anti-Semitism arguments like you did.
But I wonder how much of this idea of coming together has been imported from the likes of Steve Bannon coming over here and saying all of the EU needs to act like it was the US and all these groups have to come together. I don't know whether they actually hang together as a group properly.
Okay, all right. We'll see the next step, whether the right does unite. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics here, Donald Tusk gets candid. The European Council president scolds the Polish government on a recent visit to his native country. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. North Macedonia has elected the pro-Western candidate Stevo Penderovski after the presidential runoff. Well, the election was dominated by the name change deal agreed with Greece. And Penderovski supported change from the Republic of Macedonia to North Macedonia. It means that the country can now pursue NATO membership and joining the EU without being blocked by Greece. Well, Stevo Penderovski said last night that the victory is the country's ticket to Europe. So back with us to discuss this is Christine Berzina from the German Marshall Fund, and we still have Andrew Byrne from the Sunday Times and Jennifer Baker, EU policy journalist. All right, Christine, I'll go to you. Zorav said that the country, the premier said that they're ready for Europe. Are they really?
They are ready to stay on a path clearly to Europe. I think that the past decades have been limbo for the country, not sure whether they're going forward, whether they're going backward. And North Macedonia has been, therefore, at this tipping point, trying to see what it will do. North Macedonia is going to be proceeding into the Western institutions. NATO is going to come first. It is the simpler membership process and the one that is more security relevant. And the EU is a long process.
Sure.
But it is a decisive choice to say we are going to do that. We are going to put our economic future and we're going to turn our face in that direction. We're going to try to join the club.
I mean, we're still waiting for the go signal from the EU to start the talk. So that is like several steps forward. But, you know, so we have rule of law, judicial reforms, fight against corruption, organized crime. This is a problem that plagues current EU countries. How can it even be different for a country like North Macedonia? So should the EU actually be saying, yes, let's go ahead with these talks?
Well, I think so. I think North Macedonia is a country that has been beset by misfortune over the years. It's been in a difficult position, a difficult relationship with its neighbours. And it's spent the last couple of years doing massive political reforms. It's changed its name, which, let's not underestimate, that's quite a difficult thing for a country to do, for people to vote to change the official name of their country. And that was as part of the list of demands, essentially, for joining the Western institutions. So what's being put forward at the moment, the choice is about a green light to start accession talks. It's not about membership tomorrow. It's not about membership next week. It's to begin a process with a lot of conditionality and reforms required for Macedonia to join. And I think it's North Macedonia to join, I should say. And I think it's difficult to see at this stage how you could justify denying it. I mean, the decision will also be taken in line with Albania, which also wants to do so. And of course, there are lots of issues on both sides. You know, if both countries can't get the green light at the same time, give to them separately, but I think this process has to move forward.
When we look at the skepticism that does exist in the EU now, we had Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron expressing that. Let's put that in context. Yes, in the sense that it will be hard to deny that go-ahead, but then you have this resistance coming from the EU now, certain members of the EU.
Well, I mean, there is also a certain argument to be said that, you know, do you enlarge the club when, you know, you haven't got everyone inside, you haven't even got your own house in order? And we saw with the Big Bang enlargement 15 years ago that was, you know, 10 countries all at once, a lot of them with some very challenging problems. Not all of them have got their house in order, you know. We talk about Poland, we talk about Hungary, we even, you know, smaller countries like Malta and rule of law. Now, the one thing that will be said for the accession talks is it does at least point a country in the direction of going towards getting those problems sorted before they join. Obviously, what anyone would want is not another Big Bang, because I think that we show that was very difficult to manage for the whole bloc. But, you know, one or two countries, Albania and North Macedonia, if they can get all their problems sorted before they join, then that would be a very clear signal to say that the EU project is working.
Is that the common perception, that the Big Bang expansion was not the right way to do it, from your analysis?
Before a session, there are tremendous incentives to reduce vulnerabilities at home, to really fix the house. Once you are in, that is harder. And I think when you look at the Balkans in particular, at North Macedonia, it is a place that really needs to overcome its vulnerabilities. If we look at the referendum last summer, there was clear interference from a Russian businessman who was paying protesters in order to petition against it. There are many issues there that really need to be addressed, that need to, at home, but you need the incentive about why you're going to pick at those scabs. perhaps
was
why are
saying
you going to do this?
the direction. So do you think this is a win for, let's say, the EU versus the other power in the region, meaning Russia?
I mean, yeah, there is a geopolitical battle for influence in this region, in the Balkans, on the EU's doorstep. And so there's a real incentive and a value from a selfish point of view for the EU to ensure that it keeps these countries on this path. Because there is competition from Russia, there is competition from China, and it's in the EU's own interest to ensure that this is a stable, prosperous, integrated region.
And people want to join us. That's a good sign when people want to join your club, isn't it?
Well, there you go. Okay, now let's turn our attention to Poland because the ongoing clash between the country's ruling Law and Justice Party and Donald Tusk has stepped up a gear. Let's take a look at the message the European Council chief delivered to mark the country's Constitution Day.
Nie może być tak, że władza raz do roku obchodzi święto Konstytucji, a na co dzień Konstytucję obchodzi. Po co poprawiać Konstytucję, jeśli nie jest się z różnych powodów w stanie przestrzegać jej fundamentalnych przepisów? I chciałbym od razu przeciąć wszelkie spekulacje. Rację mają ci, którzy mówią, że jako szef Rady Europejskiej nie powinienem angażować się w kampanię polityczną na rzecz jakiejś wybranej partii politycznej, gdyż nie jest to rolą mojego urzędu, ale jest moim prawem i obowiązkiem jako przewodniczącego Rady Europejskiej wspierać Europejczyków w każdym kraju Unii Europejskiej.
What's Tusk doing there? Is he acting as council chief there, or is he laying the groundwork for plans to enter local politics? I mean, I think we were talking about this before the show.
Yeah, well, he's certainly underlining his credentials as a sort of a straight shooter and someone who says what he thinks. I think there's been some speculation, and this won't diminish it, that he has interests and aspirations to run in the Polish presidential elections. His name isn't, as far as I know, in the discussion circles for EU top jobs. So I think his attention seems to be shifting back a little bit towards Warsaw.
Okay, is he overstepping the line in doing this as council president?
I think he's a very savvy negotiator, very savvy operator, and I think he knows exactly where that line is. And he will go right up to it, without overstepping
and we can always rely on
I think we will keep seeing him on the international stage no matter what happens.
And a good tweet, actually. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, we were talking about North Macedonia a few minutes ago, but we want to know what you think. Should the EU let North Macedonia join the club? So your call is coming up at 7 p.m. local time, Brussels time. The contact information is on your screen. You can call us for free at 00800 3333702 and get in on the debate. Just use the hashtag #RawPolitics. Our lines are opening soon, just after the break.
Pick up the phone and actually call us or Skype us.
Should the European Union add new members?
The EU should definitely expand and should expand to the old Balkan countries.
You'd like to see Turkey join?
Oh yeah, definitely. They're perfectly normal people. It's kind of like it's a perfectly normal country.
You know, as a journalist, we'd be very scared of the idea of having an Erdogan-controlled European Parliament.
We still have idiots in Parliament. We still have idiots in the Sejm, but we've always had them.
You'd like to think that Scotland would be welcomed back into the EU if we did get our independence.
All right, welcome back to the program. That was just some of the highlights from our last Your Call episode. And tonight we're doing it all over again, so you can join in the debate. We want to hear from you on all of today's topics. So here's what we're talking about tonight. A chilly encounter. Top diplomats from the United States and Russia are in the high north today for a meeting of the Arctic Council. As countries scramble to claim the territory and its massive undiscovered natural resources, the economic and political opportunity is huge. But with global temperatures on the rise, the Arctic is seeing some of the most devastating effects. So the question is, should we leave the Arctic alone? Jubilation for some in North Macedonia as Stevo Penderovski, the pro-Western candidate, triumphs over his conservative rival in a runoff presidential vote.
Od ovih predsjedateljski izbori, znači zagarantiran pad napred za site nas kako luđe, kako semejstva, kako država.
But it may not be so simple. France and Germany are nervous over Baltic expansion, and Emmanuel Macron says countries in the region should be constitutionally stable before joining the EU. But we want to know what you think. Should the EU allow North Macedonia to join? And cracking down. Parents in Germany who refuse to vaccinate their children against measles could be fined up to 2,500 euros. With the number of global measles cases rising by 300% in the first 3 months of 2019, and the latest Eurobarometer poll showing half of Europeans believe that vaccines cause severe side effects, we're asking, should governments fine anti-vaxxers? Come on, Europe, have your say. Should we leave the Arctic alone? Should the EU allow North Macedonia to join? And should governments fine anti-vaxxers? So you know what to do. Get in touch. The contact information is on your screen. Call us for free, 00800 333 7002. That's the number. Send an email to rawpaul@euronews.com, and on social media, any of them. Just use the hashtag #RawPolitics, and you can also look for us on Skype. All right, joining me tonight on the Your Call program is our Brussels correspondent, Jack Parrick, and we also have Jennifer Baker and Andrew Byrne. In fact, we're all going to be on the Your Call show tonight, so do join us. So I think let's start with the last topic we saw there. Should governments be fining anti-vaxxers? I mean, that's really an interesting debate, but see the numbers. 50% of Europeans think that there's side effects to vaccination.
But the enormous amount of scientific opinion is that vaccination is a good thing. There are concerns among parents that vaccinations, can lead to autism, but the sort of herd mentality, that they call it herd health, where everybody gets vaccinated and therefore it minimises the risk. And so there is a lot of pressure. The European Commissioner for Health has been very, very strong on this during his mandate. But as you say, public opinion is not always with the science.
And the fact that it is rising and that there are alternatives to vaccinations, I mean, does that say something that people who probably are anti-vaxxers would say, well, there must be a reason why it is on the rise?
Well, I think this is where we come back to one of the topics we were discussing earlier about disinformation and fake news. And, not all parents are scientists, and we have to give them the tools and show them empirical evidence in ways that are easy for them to understand at the point where they get their health care, not via social media, not via sort of campaigns.
Yeah, but should the governments be fining parents? I mean, should you just leave the parents to decide on their own?
This is not a question of kind of like a consumer choice question, like I like this kind of vaccine or I want my child to have sort of a homeopathic alternative. This is a question of life and death. I mean, dozens of children are dying because of their weakened immune system and then being exposed to measles because of a low herd immunity rate. I think the tougher question to ask is, are fines going to work? How are you going to force a family to pay €2,000 fines? Governments generally don't have great records with collecting fines. Maybe we should instead say if your child is not vaccinated, they shouldn't be allowed to attend school so they don't put their classmates at risk.
That's part of it. That's part of the German plan, is that they won't be allowed to go to nurseries. Do you know what, Tessa? We really want people to call in on your call on this one. Skype as well. We love it when people give us a Skype and speak to us.
I mean, let us know what you think, especially if you disagree with, with governments fining, or if you think parents should have the choice or whether or not their children should be vaccinated. Call us. We would love to know what you think on this topic. It is getting very divisive in many countries.
The debates online are very aggressive.
It is.
As well,
it is. It's interesting how this, this has blown up really in Europe. Okay, you know how to get in touch. We'll just remind you how. You can call us for free at 00800 333 7002. Email at rawpaul@euronews.com, or use the hashtag #RawPolitics on social media and, of course, Skype, because we love to see you. All right. Now, it is fair to say that Brussels has become synonymous with the EU, but there's a lot more to this town than politics, right, guys? Because this weekend, when the politicos were away, the trams did play. Let's take a look at tonight's Raw Moment, featuring the European Tram Driver Championships. Who says Brussels isn't fun? That's great. That's great.
Only in Brussels.
Yeah. What they should do is next year is they should invite members of the public onto the trams to go tram bowling rather than just the drivers. I think that would be a good
Well,
way.
there were races where members of the public could get on, but they had to wear helmets because it was so high speed.
But isn't that incredible that they're doing, you call it tram bowling? But in fact, they were actually testing speeds, I think, or agility or position.
They were testing everything to do with the tram driver's wheelhouse was tested.
But to anyone who lives in Brussels, I mean, we know how they love to brake. I don't know who takes public transportation. Only in Brussels. All right. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We would love to hear your views. And again, join us for your call, which is right after this program. We want to know what you think on all of the questions we're posing to you. Get in touch. So you can find me on Twitter at Tessa Ercilia, and also go to @Euronews and use the hashtag #RawPolitics. See you in a few minutes.